Hi everybody, this is Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and I'm here with a quick discussion on George Orwell's Animal Farm, a very slim volume, 140-ish pages, quick read. I've probably read this book 5 times. Uh, there was a time in my life where I thought it was mediocre, but the past couple times I've reread it, I've really enjoyed it. I think that um, it's certainly an allegory, but I think it's an effective allegory. I think it was effective when it was written in the 1940s. I think it was effective throughout the Cold War, and I think it's certainly effective now in 2020 as we see totalitarian regimes around the world sort of uh, the coals that had sort of died down from some of those totalitarian ideas or nations that had been overwhelmed by totalitarianism. Suddenly there's a resurgence, and so Animal Farm just seems appropriate to read now. Um, Famously, of course, it's a massive allegory really focused on the Russian Revolution and its aftermath, with the animal farm being the Soviet Union. And the animals throwing out their farmer, aka the Tsar, to, in a sense, create a better farm for all of the animals. They'll all be able to work together. They won't have to feed the humans, so they'll just take care of each other and take care of themselves. And then, of course, the pigs, who are sort of the cleverest animals and the leaders, there begins to be sort of an internecine warfare between some of the pigs, Comrade Napoleon and Comrade Snowball. And eventually we see that the pig Napoleon connives his way to power. He slowly but surely, in a sense, takes every ideal that the animals have at the beginning and subverts every single one of them by the end. So within 120 pages, we go from this revolutionary farm, this sort of utopian ideal, very hopeful, to worse than it was at the start. So a couple of, sort of so many people are familiar with this book. And I think I read it when I was first time I read it, probably I was in late grade school. I was familiar with sort of the broad strokes of the Russian Revolution. I was much more aware of Stalin and Stalin versus Trotsky than I was of this guy named Lenin. And I was, 10 or 11 at the time. And so I read Animal Farm, and I picked up on some of it, but not all of it. I read it again probably in high school, and that was kind of when I was like, this is whatever. So many high school readers do. And then reading it again in my 20s, I thought, wow, there's more to this. It's not just an allegory to explain how awful totalitarianism can be to children. There's actually, in my mind, it's not specifically written for kids. It has that appearance. It has this appearance of a fable, but it's not necessarily written for kids. And part of that is because Orwell's very specific. He does these elliptical callbacks, almost like the way the chorus is in a Greek tragedy, where there are the 7 commandments that the animals create on like page 24 when they have their rebellion and they gain control of the farm. And slowly but surely what we see is each of those 7 commandments just gets worn out and modified and adjusted, and those little twists, slowly we see all of the freedom that existed on the farm, all of the collaboration that exists on the farm, ultimately just denigrates into a dictatorship. And so the 7 commandments are: whatever goes upon 2 legs is an enemy, whatever goes upon 4 legs or has wings is a friend. Third one: no animal shall wear clothes. No animal shall sleep in a bed. No animal shall drink alcohol. No animal shall kill any other animal. And then finally, all animals are equal. And slowly what we see is things like no animal shall drink alcohol to excess, or finally, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others, is the ending. But there's also some just interesting narrative writing. And then there's examples of what totalitarian propaganda looks like. So Squealer, who becomes Napoleon's sort of right-hand mouthpiece, Afterwards, Squealer was sent round the farm to explain the new arrangement to the others. "Comrades," he said, "I trust that every animal here appreciates the sacrifice that Comrade Napoleon has made in taking this extra labor upon himself. Do not imagine, comrades, that leadership is a pleasure. On the contrary, it is a deep and heavy responsibility. No one believes more firmly than Comrade Napoleon that all animals are equal. He would be only too happy to let you make your decisions for yourselves. But sometimes you might make the wrong decisions, comrades, and then where would we be? Suppose you had decided to follow Snowball with his moonshine of windmills. Snowball, who, as we know now, was no better than a criminal." "He fought bravely at the Battle of the Cowshed," said somebody. "Bravery is not enough," said Squealer. "Loyalty and obedience are more important." Great. As a teacher, I always tell students, I say, I do not want you ruled by fear. One of the worst things I can teach you is just to be blindly obedient. And then we sort of see the transformation of Napoleon. All orders were now issued through Squealer or one of the other pigs. Napoleon himself was not seen in public as often as once in a fortnight. When he did appear, he was attended not only by his retinue of dogs, but by a black cockerel who marched in front of him and acted as a kind of trumpeter, letting out a loud cock-a-doodle-doo before Napoleon spoke. Even in the farmhouse, it was said, Napoleon inhabited separate apartments from the others. He took his meals alone, with 2 dogs to wait upon him, and always ate from the Crown Derby dinner service, which had been in the glass cupboard in the drawing room. It was also announced that the gun would be fired every year on Napoleon's birthday, as well as on the other 2 anniversaries. And so we see just within Animal Farm, we see this allegory of what happens when individual freedom is subverted, when liberty is subverted, and when they even call Napoleon leader. Comrade Napoleon is our leader. And that's, of course, a very scary idea at any time. And with the way technology has developed, there's this double-edged sword of there's so much more freedom of information because anybody can just sort of like whip out a phone and record a public figure. Yet there's this constant ability through technology to track where people are going. And reading Animal Farm in 2020, it was an interesting experience. And it's a book I'll certainly return to in the future. One thing that, if you've never read it, there's not a huge amount of dialogue. It's very much told, and there are characters, there are characterizations around certain animals, particularly around a horse boxer who works very hard, and is very loyal. As we see Napoleon and Squealer as villains, as we see a mule, Benjamin, who sort of is there as this stand-in for Orwell, as like the cynic who's sort of like, I told you so, like I'm above this, but I told you so. But it was a good read. If you've read Animal Farm, you're kind of thinking like, yeah, I want to learn more. The single best history book on the Russian Revolution that I've ever found is A People's Tragedy by Orlando Figes. It's quite long. I want to say it's 900 pages with the index, so it's extraordinarily long. It starts in 1891 and goes through the 1905 revolution into the start of World War I, 1917 with the provisional government, the October Revolution, and then how the Bolsheviks cement their power, the 1919 war with Poland, memorialized in Isaac Babel's Red Cavalry, which is absolutely fantastic set of stories, and then the death of Lenin in, I believe it's 1924, and the final sort of struggle between Trotsky and Stalin. Well, the culminating struggle between Trotsky and Stalin. Other books that might shine, sort of a light on that. There's the Portable Russian Reader. So this is a very old one. It was at one point just a single volume. They later split it into a 19th century Russian Reader and a 20th century Russian Reader. The 20th century Russian Reader has a lot more, nonfiction and fiction contemporaneous to what Orwell's depicting in Animal Farm. A really interesting book on sort of a send-up of the culture of the Soviet Union in the 1930s is The Kremlin Ball by Curzio Malaparte, who was I believe he was an Italian, maybe he was French. I think he was an Italian diplomat who was an attaché in the Soviet Union. A great read on, you know, John Reed or Jack Reed's 10 Days That Shook the World, which is the October Revolution. And infamously, Stalin tried to sort of suppress the book because he's not really mentioned in it. And Trotsky and Lenin are very much the heroes of what was, of course, a great tragedy on sort of all sides. But Jack Reed's life was immortalized in the film Reds, directed by Warren Beatty, which is an excellent epic film. And has these really cool black backdrop interviews with a bunch of individuals who were like politically involved or politically active or artistically active throughout that period of like 1914 to 1920. And just it's a really fascinating document. And famously, sort of some of Reed's last lines are on a trip from Baku, which is now in Azerbaijan, back up towards Moscow or St. Petersburg. He says, you know, he's saying, you don't rewrite my speeches. He goes, when you purge what a person loves, you purge what's unique, and when you purge what's unique in a person, you purge dissent, and when you purge dissent, you purge you don't have a revolution because dissent is the revolution. And I think that sort of gets right at those anti-totalitarian ideas. You know, whether you're wherever you fall on the political spectrum, you can recognize that there are totalitarian, you know, regimes, and that they're not good. If you enjoy sort of allegory and satire and things like that, Jonathan Swift's a great writer, fun writer to dip into, and then not too close to the plot at all. But the Fables comic books or graphic novels by Bill Willingham, the second volume is called Animal Farm and deals with a rebellion of the fairy tale animals on their farm. And of course, it's led by the pigs. And the fairy tale pigs are the three little pigs. So the three little pigs are the ones who lead the Animal Farm rebellion. So that's it, BookTube. Thank you, everybody. Let me know if you've read Orwell, if you like Animal Farm, or if you know, I'm sure there are so many of you who are much greater experts on Russian history and the Russian Revolution than I am. So if you have any great reads, please let me know. So thanks.